Point of View is brought to you in association with Stanbic Bank, moving forward.
Hello, this is The Point of View. Welcome to another show where we bring you the right guests, ask them relevant questions on issues that matter to you. And tonight is a hot one. It's live and interactive. If you're watching us on social media, you can comment on the Facebook stream or send us a Twitter comment with the hashtag Point of View. And if you're watching on television, we have a WhatsApp number. Send in your questions and your comments. We'll be very glad to read them. And so this week has been very eventful. The president attended a bar conference in Takoradi, where he addressed thousands of lawyers, and he sought to justify his record in the fight against corruption. He says attempts by the opposition to tag him as quote-unquote the clearinghouse for corruption would simply not work. Well, barely 24 hours after his speech, General Secretary of the opposition party, Johnson Akosua-Addo, also held a press conference, initially to address BDS issues, but he waded into the corruption issue and says, Mr. President, you are sitting on an apex of corruption. I have a very interesting duo in the studio tonight to help us deconstruct what I have captioned the corruption wars. I'll tell you who they are when I come back. Stay with us. So on the corruption wars tonight, I have the government spokesperson on governance and legal affairs, lawyer Herbert Krapa. Herbert, great to have you on the show.
Thank you, Bernard. Good evening.
Good evening. I also have the newly minted NDC parliamentary candidate for, they call it AAK?
AAK.
Asebu Kwamankese. Abura Asebu Kwamankese. Former Deputy Minister for Communications, Felix Ofosu-Kwakye. So Felix, great to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me, Bernard.
This is your debut on my program, although you've been on City for a few. So let's start with the president. President is a lawyer, and when he addresses the bar conference, it's a big issue. Everybody in law in Ghana is there. Chief Justice, Attorney General, all the huge legal figures are there. And the president chose that occasion to defend his anti-corruption record. Here's a quick excerpt of his speech. Back to that shortly. But barely 24 hours after the president's speech, the General Secretary of the NDC responded, and I'll bring you those clips later. But maybe, Herbert, let's start with, why did the president choose the bar conference to deal with the corruption issue?
I think it's important for us to appreciate the current dispensation that we're in, the atmosphere that we are in today. I think just before the bar conference on Monday, the week before, it was quite clear that the opposition had heightened its attempt to tag the government of the day with corruption. And the president thought the forum, the bar conference, was a huge one, where he had been given the opportunity to speak to rule of law and issues bordering on governance and the rule of law. And the president thought that it was a fine opportunity to tackle the question of corruption head on. It is important. It is important because it sends very strong signals that the leader of the country, the person who is supervising the people in place to help fight corruption, is not scared of the subject, is prepared to face the subject head on, and is prepared to put his record on the table for scrutiny.
I noticed government communication advertised that he was going to speak about corruption. So you knew it was like a single issue address. Because
government communication
because typically you don't have government communication advertised infographics that the president will be speaking to corruption at a bar conference. It's never happened. So clearly, this was the main issue he was going to address there.
The courage that we want to speak to the matter of corruption when the opposition has heightened its attempts.
So it was a response to the opposition?
It was, in many respects, opening up the conversation to the Ghanaian people for us to have a continuous conversation. And I am happy. I'm happy about that, because I'm sure you are happy too. I listen to you on the radio every morning. You have a tall list that you are clearing gradually. So I'm happy that we are talking about it, and it should be a recurring conversation. We have a president who has demonstrated that if there's extra cash in his hands, he will invest it in the human capital of our nation. So it is important, if we are able to stop the bleeding, then we are able to progress as a nation in the right.
The clip is ready now. Let me show you a bit of the president in his nice suit, definitely with the pocket square. Or because at bar conference he wears suit, because usually he wears African wear. But I think when he meets lawyers, he has to show them he's the senior lawyer. So this is the president,
which he is.
It cannot be the case that people are condemned on the basis of mere allegations without law. That is the law of the jungle. I'm aware of the orchestrated attempts by my opponents to hang the tag of corruption on the necks of my government and myself, despite all the manifest efforts being made to deal with the phenomenon of corruption. I just have one simple answer for them. It will not work. I did not come into public life to enrich myself. So far, every single alleged act of corruption leveled against any of my appointees is being or has been investigated by independent bodies such as SRAG, the CID, and in some cases by Parliament itself. From the allegations against the then Minister Designate for Energy at his parliamentary confirmation hearing, to that against the former CEO of BOS, to those against the two deputy chiefs of staff, to the conflict of interest allegations against the Minister for Finance, to the claims of extortion against the Trade and Industry Minister, to allegations of doubling in visa racketeering against the then Minister for Youth and Deputy Minister for Youth and Sports, the then Director General of the National Sports Authority, who, even though exonerated by the CID, later resigned, and the chairperson of the board of the National Sports Authority. To the allegations of bribery leveled against the Secretary to the Interministerial Committee on Illegal Mining, to the latest involving the suspended acting CEO of the Public Procurement Authority, PPA, and the dismissed CEO of the National Youth Authority. They have all been investigated or are being investigated by the authorized institutions of the state and not by President Akufo-Addo. It is not my job to clear or convict any person accused of wrongdoing or of engaging in acts of corruption. My job is to act on allegations of corruption by referring the issue or issues to the proper investigative agencies for the relevant inquiry and necessary action.
So that was the president speaking on Monday. So Herbert, this is what he's saying. He listed a lot of cases.
Yes.
So in summary, what is he saying? That even though there are cases of corruption allegations, they are being investigated and he's not the one doing the clearance.
Because the institutions of state, which have the power mandated to do these investigations, are the ones investigating these cases. Now, when they are done, the president has the responsibility to come before the Ghanaian people and make the announcement that the investigations have been conducted, have been concluded, and that no wrongdoing has been found or some wrongdoing has been found. Where, for instance, on the face of it, as they say in law, prima facie, the president thinks that the evidence that is before him is not something that he would want to wait for an investigation to even go into. He would ask the people to step aside. And we have seen that already with some of his appointees. NYA, for instance, we have seen that with the prima facie evidence before the president has had to ask some people to step aside. We've seen that with Mr. ABAJ's office,
Public
Procurement Authority, that the president has had to ask him to step aside, so has suspended him pending investigations into the matter. The president has emphasized it, and I think it is important that he is not the one clearing anyone where the investigations have been conducted. For instance, in in the Abu and Francis Nsu case, where investigations have been conducted and no wrongdoing has been found. Let's be careful that we are not jumping around, shouting on the rooftops, saying that this person has been suspected of doing an act. No evidence has been put on the table. President nevertheless says that the authorities should look into these matters. They look into it. There's no evidence on the table. And we say that the president cannot ask these people to go back to work to continue with their duties.
So, Mr. Ofosu-Kwakye, what is the NDC's problem?
Well, Bernard, I mean, I've listened to my brother, my good friend Herbert, with some amusement. There's no dispute that the Akufo-Addo government has been overrun and overwhelmed by corruption. Indeed, he makes reference to the week preceding the Bar Conference. That week was characterized by intense public anger and outrage over the sheer volume of corruption that was witnessed under the Akufo-Addo government. So when it was announced that the president was going to take advantage of the Bar Conference to address the subject, the conventional wisdom would be that he would at least do a mea culpa, at the very least acknowledge that there is a problem, and then outline steps to address that problem. Unfortunately, the president adopted a rather defensive and combative posture and cocooned himself in a bubble of delusion and denial. The president's submissions can be grouped into three. The first point he sought to make was that it was the political opposition, in this case the NDC, that was making up allegations and hurling them at him in a bid to tag him as corrupt. Second, he has investigated every single case and dealt with it qualitatively and substantively. And third, he was doing a number of things to ensure that corruption does not take place under his government. Now, we need to address these subjects thoroughly. To begin with, the president adopted a rather sanctimonious approach to the issue of corruption in opposition. He leveled all manner of allegations against his predecessor. It is instructive that he complains about false allegations leveled against him now that he is president. The records will show that he is perhaps about the only political leader who has made very specific allegations against an incumbent which have turned out to be false. And I crave your indulgence to allow me to give you a few examples. Now, on the 9th of December 2014, at the Aliu Mahama Memorial Lectures here in Accra, the president claimed that the Kaswa Interchange project had been inflated. No sooner had he made that allegation than his own ranking member on the Roads and Transport Committee of Parliament, Honorable President Ofosu-Kwakye, and Mr. Duomi is currently the Deputy Minister for Roads and Transport, come out to say that the president's claims cannot be true because, one, he is an engineer by training. Two, he has worked at the Ghana Highways Authority before, I think as the Eastern Regional Director or so, and so was in a firm position to ascertain the accuracy of estimates and breakdowns presented by government. He said that government's breakdowns were accurate, and therefore that project was not.
Said it in Parliament?
He said it in an interview with Joy FM. You can check. The second untruth told by President Akufo-Addo in opposition occurred on the 19th of October 2015. In Amsterdam, he claimed that the government of the day, headed by President Mahama, had procured diaries, presidential diaries, to the tune of $10 million. I mean, Herbert speaks for government. He can tell you that since President Akufo-Addo became president, he has printed 3 editions of the presidential diaries. And if you look at the huge number or the numbers in his government, it stands to reason that at least he's printed 3 times the numbers that we printed. Ask him how much those diaries cost and whether or not he did not use the same mechanism that we used to finance the diaries to produce it. So this was a clear untruth that he leveled at his predecessor in a bid to undermine him. The final one occurred on the 28th of April 2016. He claimed at what he termed the true State of the Nation address in response to the sonar that President Mahama had delivered that year, that the Reid Hospital project had been inflated by $142 million. It took no less a person than his own friend, Mr. Kwakye, to correct the records and say that nothing of the sort had happened because the facts were available, Parliament had it, and there is no place for that particular allegation. So it would appear that perhaps the president's own shadows are haunting him, and he believes that what he did to his predecessor is being done to him. So that clears the claim about falsehoods. Again, it was not the political opposition that held the president's hand to sign that scandalous miscellaneous deal. You remember the executive approval he gave?
This is in relation to that marriage.
Absolutely, the innovation deal. That deal was going to ensure that we were shortened by $800 million. The president signed that deal on his own accord. and took it to Parliament. But for the vigilance of the minority, we would have been shortchanged by $800 million. It wasn't Asiedu Ketia or myself or President Mahama who urged the president to sign that executive approval without even showing it to his cabinet. So the claim that the political opposition is making up stories cannot be true. Again, it was not the political opposition that asked Emmanuel Asigri at NYE to violate the procurement process and award a sole source contract to the tune of 4.5 million Ghana cedis to an entity to train 500 youth at a cost of 9,000 Ghana cedis per head. It wasn't the political opposition that did that. It was an act of omission and commission on the part of his own appointee that led to that debacle. We were not behind Mr. Eje's 14 companies at the PPA who got restricted tendering contracts in a clear conflict of interest situation. The opposition did not influence that. So it appears that the president does not even appreciate the magnitude of the problem. He believes that the corruption debate must be narrowed down to a banter between the NDC and himself. And so if Ghanaians are complaining, then it must be the opposition that is up to some mischief. But you see, it is imperative to examine the president's claim once again. The claim that he has investigated every corruption case and taken action also cannot be true on the face of the facts. And I will cite a few examples.
The appropriate body.
Well, I will examine that.
Not him.
Yes, you see,
the
that claim cannot be correct in the face of the facts that we know. Let's take the Muvimpina scandal, for instance, which broke out in 2017. The president, at a media interaction in August...
Sorry, Muvimpina for viewers is the boss.
The 5 million litre
contaminated fuel, yes.
You know what? The president, at a media interaction, later that year, I think in August 2017, claimed that there was no wrongdoing. He had a briefing. The BNI had cleared Mr. Avle Kwamankese. Meanwhile, when the matter broke, the appropriate agency, indeed the most authoritative agency in the petroleum downstream sector, is the National
NPA.
Petroleum Authority. They issued a statement in which they said the following, and permit me to quote them. They said, additionally, the NPA has noted that Muvimpina Energy and Zoop Oil are not licensed to undertake any commercial activity in the downstream petroleum industry. Their activities therefore infringe on Section 11 of the National Petroleum Authority Act 691/2005. Accordingly, the NPA shall take appropriate legal action against the said companies. In fact, the BOST itself commissioned an internal inquiry headed by Mr. Senor Kosi. You remember? That inquiry concluded that that transaction was criminal in nature and wondered why it took place in the first place.
Is it a published report?
It's a published report. It's a matter of public record. Yet, the president, in spite of this glaring evidence, claimed that appropriate agencies had cleared Mr. Obi.
Was it claimed before or after these findings?
BOST issued that statement before the president made that claim. The president was relying on a supposed BNI report, which itself sought to undermine a ministerial committee set up by Mr. Boakye Jakun at the time. Why was the president afraid of the committee's work and did not allow them to see their work to fruition before making that comment? Because he knew that the facts would be laid bare, as laid bare by the NPA. When the NPA comments on issues relating to the downstream petroleum sector, they are the most appropriate agency. And as far as the records show, they did not clear Mr. Kwamankese. Again, let us examine the cash for seed scandal. You recall that there was a parliamentary committee, a bipartisan parliamentary committee, made up of 3 majority members and 2 minority members. Now, before that committee had the opportunity to conclude their work and present a report, the president, again, at a media interaction in August 2018, dismissed that committee's work and said it was going nowhere because he had a briefing from the Minister of Trade, the same person who was the subject of investigation by Parliament. And because of the president's overwhelming influence, the majority members on the committee issued a report which was at variance with what transpired openly that we all watched.
So there was a split.
There was a split. The minority members on the committee were then compelled to issue a minority report, even though that is not
led by the MP for
Dominic Ayine. Absolutely. So again, on that occasion, it cannot be said that an appropriate body cleared. And indeed, we all watched the.
But sorry, did the minority report implicate the trade minister?
It indicted the trade minister. At the very least, he bears ultimate responsibility for allowing the name of a credible government agency like the Ministry of Trade to be used by private entities to make money. Essentially,
but there was there evidence that there was money paid?
Absolutely. Indeed, there was. Mr. Ashim Morton admitted so before the committee. He claimed that the president, in the invitation that was sent to the private sector players, meant him. In other words, they were asking private sector players, businessmen, to pay $100,000 to sit beside Mr. Ashim Morton. But with the greatest respect to Mr. Ashim Morton, would you pay $1,000 to sit with him? Yet,
I don't even have it.
Absolutely. But even if you had, would you pay $1,000 to sit with Mr. Ashim Morton, president of the Millennium Development, Challenge Corporation or something? I've gotten the name of the company that he, Millennium Excellence Awards, I beg your pardon. It was President Akufo-Addo that they were paying monies to sit beside. Yet, that report was obfuscated in a bid to sanitize the image of government. The final example I want to give you on this matter is the Australia visa scandal, and Herbert alluded to it. As we say colloquially, we were sitting about somewhere when it emerged that 40 Ghanaians who were not journalists had been transported to Australia under false pretenses. And Bernard, I listened to you when you examined that subject. You were extremely upset about the huge embarrassment that this had caused, because it made international headlines and projected Ghana in extremely negative light. Now, we were told that the Minister of Sports actually penned a memo to the president informing him that his initial investigation showed that it was his deputy, Pius Enam Hajide, who, as chairman of the organizing committee of the Commonwealth Games for Ghana, facilitated this dubious transaction. On the basis of that, the president said Mr. Hajide should step aside pending investigations. And then two other officials, I think the board chairman and the chief executive officer of the National Sports Authority, were made to step aside. The general impression then was that there was going to be credible investigations upon which the president would take further action. We didn't hear about that investigation until the eve of the NPP delegates conference in Koforidua, when it was announced that the report from the CID had been received and Mr. Hajide and others had been cleared. Bernard, if Mr. Hajide and others were not the ones who perpetrated that fraud, that criminal visa racketeering, who did? And how come the president of this republic was not interested in getting the CID to find out what happened? Only two conclusions flow from this, Bernard. It is either there was actually no investigation and that what we were presented with was a charade, for which reason they cannot produce that report, or that the report confirmed the sports minister's claims against his deputy. That is why it is being concealed.
Good.
Now, how is it that a president who wants to fight corruption is so eager to conceal vital information which clears his own appointee?
Let's take your reactions to these three serious issues.
I think it is important that we do not create the impression that institutions of state who have the responsibility to help the government to investigate these matters, let us not create the impression that they either do not know what they are about, that they cannot conduct their investigations, or they cannot help the government with the investigations that are before them. Visa Pius Enam Hajide matter. The president actually, when he received initial briefing, took immediate steps to ask Mr. Hajide to step aside pending investigation into the matter. If this is a person who is about to conceal any wrongdoing, would he take that bold step of asking him to clear himself out of the way so that the criminal investigation department would investigate the matter and then bring their finding? When they did that, no wrongdoing was found on the part of the deputy minister, because the evidence that was put on the table could not support the fact that he was responsible for what had happened. What it means is that the president would reinstate Mr. Hajide and ask the CID to continue with the investigation and bring to book whoever was responsible for whatever happened, if it so happened. And we know that this people were sent in the name of being journalists and they were not journalists, and we know what happened.
So who was responsible for the embarrassment? Who was responsible for the wrongdoing?
So that is what the CID would investigate.
But I thought they had finished the investigation. So what's the basis of clearing somebody if you haven't finished?
So the investigation the report that will come before you, to the extent that your deputy minister, the deputy minister of youth and sports, is sitting aside because allegations have been thrown at him that he's supposed to have masterminded what happened. Preliminary investigations show that he had absolutely nothing to do with what happened. What does the president do? He asks him to go back to work, and the CID would continue with their investigations and bring their final report and take action. Seriously, Bernard, because if the investigation does not support the fact that Mr. Hajide had done something wrong, how do you say that he should continue to be aside?
So you're essentially saying that he was asked to step aside preliminarily for investigations to take place?
He was asked to step aside.
Initially?
For investigations.
Now investigations have not thoroughly been finished.
Investigations exonerate him. So he's asked to go back to work.
So where are they? What else the investigation find? Was the investigation about Pius or about what happened in Australia?
So the investigation is about what happened in Australia and the role of the deputy minister. But don't forget that he had been mentioned to be the one masterminding what happened. And so the investigation was supposed to be what had happened and whether Pius Enam Hajide had played any role at all in that event.
Has the CID finished their work?
What it means is that once the CID is done, prosecution would continue if they find that anybody is culpable and would have to be prosecuted. I am not able to say that the CID has finished or have not finished. When the CID is done, the president would receive the final full report, and of course, the CID would be allowed to continue with the investigation.
The president announced Pius's clearance on the basis of an unfinished work.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that the president asked the CID to look into the matter. The allegation that was before the president was that Pius had contributed to this event. The CID looked into the matter and they find that Pius had not contributed to what had happened.
But that would be a shambolic work, because if you are looking for what caused a problem and you are saying that to the extent that this person wasn't the cause, then he can go and sit down there and investigate the rest. I mean, how do you...
No, you don't say that.
I'm not a lawyer, but investigations must be done in a wholesome fashion.
But that's what
so
the CID...
you can't say that because Mr. Pius is not the one who caused it, he can go and return to work and we'll finish the investigation. You've either finished or you've not.
Bernard,
if you finished...
Bernard.
Because it's...
Bernard, if you have conducted an investigation,
yes,
you say that some persons were taken to Australia in the name of being journalists and what have you. The other leg of the allegation, the matter was that Mr. Hajide, who was the Deputy Minister of Sports at the time, had contributed to what had happened. Now the CID concludes its investigations and says that Pius did not contribute to what had happened.
I don't understand this one. I'll take a break. I have to come back to this issue. Honestly, we are still on the point of view. We are trying to understand this corruption matter and the president's defense of his record and his rejection of the claim that he's become a clearinghouse for corruption. And Felix Ofosu-Kwakye from the NDC has listed 3 instances where he thinks this clearinghouse concept has been proved. And Mr. Herbert Krapa debunks that, and he's saying that none of the 3 is correct. He's dealing with one. We'll come back and do the other 2. We'll read your comments to stay with us. And welcome back to The Point of View, and we welcome Dalex Finance to the show. They are our sponsors for the next quarter. Felix Ofosu-Kwakye, a former deputy minister, now NDC parliamentary candidate for AAK. Abura Asebu Kwamankese. Herbert Krapa, government spokesperson on governance, and he's a lawyer as well. He's going to trying to respond to some issues raised by Felix. So,
Bernard, yes, let me wrap up on that.
Yes.
In an investigation, okay, persons are drawn to be the possible suspects in the matter. Now, one of the persons that was drawn down as a suspect in that matter, and it's public knowledge, is Pius Enam Hajide. When you begin your investigation and you find that that one person had nothing to do with what happened, why continue to investigate him?
Where is the report exonerating him? If the investigation is in parts and there's a part about him, why don't you release what was said about him so we all know in our minds that he's clear? Then you move to the rest. I'll leave that question hanging. Let's go to Bust. Bust moving Pina,
and then cash for seats.
Bust
moving Pina.
Yes.
The president was not the one who said no wrongdoing had been found in that matter. it was a BNI report. It was a BNI report that was handed to the president that said that there was no wrongdoing in that matter, and that the company Moving was not involved in any criminal matter as was being alleged by the opposition. So that it is not factually correct that it was the president that cleared Moving.
So he was quoting BNI.
The president actually said a BNI report is what he was basing his...
Why did he prefer the BNI report to the NPA views on the matter?
The president did not prefer a BNI report to NPA views. The president asked...
Because he just read a letter from NPA, I
the
believe.
president asked the Bureau of National Investigation to look into the allegations that had come to the fore. The BNI conducted its investigation and handed the report to the president. It's not about the president electing BNI over
So
people.
what did the BNI conclude? That no. So, okay, who did wrong in that case? Because clearly, there were infractions. What do you call it? Contaminated fuel had been sold to the public. It raised public outcry. If it wasn't the CEO of BOST, Mr. Boateng Alfred, who did it? Who caused? Who caused the selling of contaminated fuel to unlicensed company Moving and Zoop Oil?
What the BNI concluded was that contaminated fuel had not been sold to the public. Bear in mind that that wasn't the first time that contaminated fuel, that BOST would be occasioned with contaminated fuel, and they would have to find a way to dispose of it. Now, there's a manner in which they dispose of it to entities that have use for that fuel, to the extent that you make sure that that fuel does not find its way into the tanks of the general public. And what that investigation concluded was that the contaminated fuel did not find its way out of BOST tank, and therefore did not find its way into the tanks of
BNI.
This is BNI report. So there's no wrongdoing.
Don't forget that an energy minister also set up a committee to investigate the matter. But the president did not make reference to the energy minister's committee.
So the energy minister's initial committee was consumed by the BNI investigation. Bear in mind that you have the energy minister setting up a committee, the NPA. So the BNI comes to investigate, and they would speak to, of course, to the NPA, speak to the energy ministry, speak to BOST itself, and come out with
so the president relied on BNI. Fine. So president prefers BNI to energy ministry under BOST scandal.
I did not say so.
Well,
the president...
You don't need to say it. My conclusion is that he made reference to the BNI report because that's the one that is authoritative for him.
It's not the same as saying he preferred it to.
We are fighting over English, don't worry. He chose to cite the BNI report in his public statement. True or false? He did.
That was the authoritative report.
My other question is, now let's go to cash for seat. Yes. So how come in the cash for seat he is using what the minister said and not what the parliament is saying? Because in the BOST case, he's using BNI over what the minister of the supervising ministry is saying. So yet in the cash for seat, he's relying on Mr. Chemantin's views.
Who investigated cash for seats?
You have to answer that question.
The bipartisan committee that was set up by Parliament. And what did that committee say? That there was no wrongdoing, there was no the allegations that were leveled against the trade ministry and the trade minister cannot be substantiated, and that the allegations were false. I think that is what is important, that we empower the institutions of state, Parliament, SHRAJ, PPA, Attorney General's Department, Office of the Special Prosecutor. I think that is what is important. Auditor General's Office, that we empower the institutions of state to help central government in the fight against corruption. Rather than nitpicking that this person has said so, this person has said so, why don't we empower the Auditor General's Office, the Office of the Special Prosecutor, the CID, year on year since President Akufo-Addo took office, you have seen 25% increment in the resources to these places. You have seen 34% 2016, 2017. I think that is significant. It is significant to the extent that you empower the institutions, you set up laws, you institute laws that would help you in the fight against corruption. Don't forget that this is not a matter that you will be able to say, I am president, I am in office for 8 years, I am in office for 4 years, I'm in office for 12 years. There is not going to be a single instance where corruption will be brought up against your government.
Brilliant.
But when it is brought up, how do you deal with it? Are you going to be that president that is able to look at the Ghanaian people in the face and say that I remain incorruptible, that I will supervise a government that will be accountable to you? Or you are going to be a president who, when the question of corruption is put to you, you are fumbling and wondering whether it is a question in your personal capacity, or in your capacity as a public officer, or what have you. The current president has decided that it is a matter that we must tackle head on. We must speak to it, but it is not a question of mere allegations.
So are you saying that if we took this president's record in dealing with corruption in his government and compared it to his immediate predecessor, he would be in a better, there'll be a better verdict on him?
I will not be the one saying so. The Afrobarometer report of 2019, when the question is posed, whether is the government doing a good or bad job of fighting corruption? In 2015, 25% of them thought so. In 2019, 60% of the respondents thought that the government is doing a good job in the fight against corruption. Bernard,
sorry, what is this?
This is the Global Corruption Barometer 10th edition, Transparency International.
Okay.
Now, what is important...
If we have it, put it up.
What is important is that it is a fight against corruption. It is that you are not saying that persons who have been alleged to be involved in corrupt acts, you don't investigate them, you don't take any action, you move them from the office they are in and relocate them to the office of the president. That is worrying to the extent that President John Mahama himself, and I'm not surprised that when the question
Sorry, the thing is on the screen, so what's that? Just explain what is there, so people know.
So that's the Afrobarometer report, Transparency International 2019. And I am speaking to the corruption perception and what people think is happening to the fight against corruption.
I see.
And I'm saying that, look, you see the column down there. Is the government doing a good or bad job of fighting corruption?
And when they ask which people? Ghanaians?
Yes.
In 2019?
In 2019 and 2015.
So what in 2015, what did they say?
In 2015, 25%, if taken it off your screen, 25% of them thought that the government was doing so 25% of them thought that the government was doing a good job. In 2015. 71% of them thought that the government was doing a bad job. This was President John Mahama's government. In 2019, is the government doing a good job? 60% of them think that the government is doing a good job in the fight against corruption. 30% of them think that the government is doing a bad job in the fight against corruption. It is clear.
From this? And sample size 2,400. Just to be clear. So in your view, this shows that beyond, the perception in your...
Yes, because let me take a comment. What are the facts? Have the institutions been strengthened or not?
We'll come to OSP shortly, but I want to take his comment and then you need to respond to this. If he who comes to accuse somebody of corruption must
not a problem, Bernard.
And you have 5 cases in court against your people.
No, Bernard, you see, I could not help but notice the look of bewilderment on your face as Herbert struggled to explain away the Australia visa scandal, the boss moving pinna scandal, and then the cash for seed scandal. And with the greatest respect to Herbert, his explanations are astonishing in their defiance of logic. Look, this country is heavily embarrassed on the international circuit because 40 Ghanaians had been ferried to Australia posing as journalists when they were not. The matter becomes topical. There's huge public outcry. The president of this country orders an investigation into the matter, and we are told that he was not interested in finding out who actually perpetrated the offense.
We didn't say so.
No, if you allowed me, I beg your pardon, I allowed you to speak with the greatest respect. Merely because, according to the president, the CID said that Pius was not the one who perpetrated it. the investigation ends. And Bernard, you need to check the timeline. It's been 1 whole year since the president announced Pius's reinstatement, when he was about to embark on a tour to the Volta region. And it was clear that there were undercurrents in the Volta region which compelled him to do the reinstatement. Look at the Boss Muvimpina scandal. You see, the Boss Muvimpina scandal revolved around what we believed to be the corrupt disposal of contaminated fuel. As for the issue of whether or not that fuel found its way into people's vehicles, another matter. But I insist here, on the basis of the evidence, that the most authoritative source of information on the petroleum downstream regulation is the NPA. When they say that Section 11 of the National Petroleum Authority Act has been violated, it does not lie in the mouth of the BNI to say otherwise. The BNI is clothed in no such power.
Is the NPA an investigative body?
No, but you see, the NPA regulates that.
So they can make a comment. No, but if you want to investigate,
they did not make a comment.
What did they do?
They stated emphatically in a statement that they issued on their own.
After an investigation, or based on preliminary observation?
This statement indicates that they had investigated the matter. They had looked into Muvimpina's record.
Can I look at that statement?
Yes, they had moved, or they had looked into Muvimpina's record to see whether they were even qualified to operate within the petroleum downstream sector. And the verdict was that they were not, because they were not registered with the NPA. Then the second leg of that is that precisely because they were not registered, they should not even have qualified to take part in the procurement process. Because registration and licensing is a vital prerequisite to participate in any procurement exercise. So on 2 counts, Muvimpina had committed a crime. The man who sold it to them had committed a crime. There are people in court for procurement breaches, are they not? So on what basis does President Akufo-Addo proceed to claim Mr. Obenboating?
NPA said that they will take appropriate legal action against the said company.
No appropriate legal action has been taken because the president preempted them. The president said no offense had been committed when the facts show otherwise. Again, look at the cash for sea scandal. It was established during the hearings that between $15,000 to $100,000 was paid by businesses depending on how close they were to President Akufo-Addo on that night. That was a bone of contention. Before the committee could wrap up its report and could wrap up its proceedings and present a report, the president said that it was going to go nowhere. So how dare majority members of parliament to act contrary to what the president has said? It was no surprise, therefore, that they tried to obfuscate the issues and issued a report that was contrary to what we had all witnessed. You see, so these developments strengthen my conviction that what the government passed off as investigations were in fact cynical cover-ups.
So let me ask you, so are you then frustrated that despite what you claim to be glaring acts of reluctance on the president's part to deal with corruption, Global Corruption Barometer, for example, and just a quick question,
sure,
pointing to a more favorable view of this president?
Well, Bernard, you see, what Herbert read was a summary of the report. I have had occasion to read the entire report. You need to look at the timelines. Even though the report was presented in 2019, the data was collected in 2017. Shortly after a new government where there's euphoria, there was talk about a special prosecutor area, the fight for corruption and what have you. So it definitely influenced people's belief.
Data, so can we say that the data in 2015 was also collected in 2013?
2013, 2014. The NDC was in power, so I will not run away from it. But I'm telling you...
What is the closest approximation to NDC NPP comparison we have?
But the point I'm making to you is that you need to look at the context of the report.
Okay.
But I'm going to make a more substantive point. Look, the most authoritative corruption barometer in the world is the Transparency International CPI.
Do you have it there?
I have it here. I have the figures here, and you can verify them. Look, the best ever performance that Ghana has put up was recorded in 2014 under the NDC, 48 points. The second best was still under President Mahama, 47. Since President Akufo-Addo has been president, his best performance has been 41. So his best performance has been worse than President Mahama's worst performance. Indeed, the worst ever performance was in 2017 under President Akufo-Addo, when he had a score of 40. And you see, you need to also look at the quality of input that goes into this, service. Whereas the Afro barometer...
Okay, actually, we had it. We had it. Can you put it up? Sorry, it was correct. Put it up.
Okay.
So this one.
Great.
Okay.
You see, you also need to look at the
So just to be clear, the 48 there is...
2014.
So in this case, the higher the figure, the better the country does.
The better the country does. And indeed, we dropped...
But you've had 4 years of Mahama and only 2 years of Akufo-Addo.
So if in the first 2 years of the government, people think that they are this corrupt, it tells you exactly what is happening. You see, you also need to look at the input, the data that went into it, and the sources of the data. When you come to the CPI, they actually interview people who interface with government. So they speak to diplomats, they speak to businessmen, they speak to investors, They speak to people within the business community who
so you
interface with
prefer
government.
the Global Corruption Index?
No, it is the most authoritative.
So
Indeed, look, when the NPP was in opposition, they made a song and a dance out of it. So they cannot run away from it. But I'm making the point that if you look at the context within which this Afrobarometer report was compiled and compare it to what the Corruption Perception Index does, it is a vastly superior aggregation. And in any event, you see, we also need to examine why we are here. Bernard, it's an extremely important point. I spoke to you about the president's posturing in opposition. Look, the president went as far as making a categorical promise that he was not going to operate a family and friends government. You recall, on the 17th of January 2016, he stood at an NPP delegates conference at Kumasi and made the following pronouncement. It is on graphiconline.com. He said, "My wife would not be in charge of the distribution of contracts in this country. She would never distribute contracts in the country," he said, adding, "I won't operate a family and friends government in Ghana, and I can assure that every person in the country would have his fair share of the national cake." This simply means that we will not find relatives of the president in government, or that things will not be skewed in their favor. But what is the situation on the ground as I speak? At the last count, Bernard, there were at least 65 individuals who fit the description of friends and family in the Akufo-Addo government. If you permit me, I'm going to mention the names for you. You see,
what is your definition of friends and family?
The president's own definition.
What, can you repeat it?
He says, "My wife would not be in charge of the distribution of contracts in this country."
Is his wife in charge
She
of
would
contracts?
not, but was the other president's wife in charge of the distribution of contracts? She would never distribute contracts in the country, he said, adding, "I won't operate a family and friends government." Simply means that
I won't put my family and friends in
government or skew
So
this
this list you have, is it family and friends in government?
Absolutely. Let me list it for you. And you see, I want you to take particular notice of a common thread.
Okay.
So we have the president's cousin, Ken Ofori-Atta, as finance minister. The president's cousin, Duke Ofori-Atta, is a presidential staffer. The president's cousin, Nana Ofori-Atta, is the board chairman of the National Theatre. The president's cousin, Alice Ofori-Atta, is the chief executive of the Tema Development Corporation. The president's in-law, Eno Ofori-Atta, married to one of the president's cousins, is the deputy MD of SIC Life. The president's cousin, Kwesi Amoako-Atta, is the roads minister.
Oh, is Amoako-Atta?
Oh, absolutely.
He's not.
No. Let me make the point. He is. You see, let me make the point.
First cousin, second cousin,
He is the cousin of the president. You see,
but he's an MP on his own. He's a competent man.
Well, when the president was making the declaration about family and friends, he did not make a distinction between competence or the lack of it. Let me continue. If you go to the presidential staffers list that the president presented to Parliament, I think last year, it is brimming with more family and friends. There is Michael Ofori-Atta, the president's relative, director of ECOWAS at the presidency. Bernard, there is already a director in charge of ECOWAS at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Regional Integration. There is William Ofori-Atta, another relative of the president, who is described as an office assistant.
Are you using the Ofori-Atta just because of the Ken connection?
No. There is Alice Ofori-Atta again, a protocol officer, and then there is Atachia, Minister of Works and Housing. We all know the relation between him and the president.
MP for the president's constituency.
Oh no, you see, when the president.
So what the Atachia listen to the president?
Oh, he's also a cousin. We know it. Look.
Atachia is the president.
Yes. You see, the list is lengthier.
No, are you sure?
Oh, why? Don't you know this?
We know that he was in line for the throne before the Ochihini took over.
Why? But President Akufo-Addo is the grandson of Nana Ofori-Atta, who had 120 children, one of whom is President Akufo-Addo's mother. So you know the connection. Absolutely.
Is it true?
You know the connection immediately.
120 children.
Let me come to the point that.
So what are you saying?
Where are we going?
So
he's saying that your president is running a family and friends government.
Let me land. If you let me land.
You already landed.
No, I have not. You see, so here is a man who makes firm commitments to the people of this country, makes a bold declaration that he will not run a family and friends government, and yet comes into power and immediately installs the most nepotistic government in our history, brimming with family and friends. So immediately it tells you that he cannot be counted upon to fulfill any promise in relation to fighting corruption. So it's a little surprise that when corruption perception indexes are released during his tenure, he performs poorer than all other.
I'll take another break and give Herbert a chance to respond when we come back. This is still the point of view. Quite a number of messages as well, talking corruption, clearing house, and now this man has introduced a new terminology into the matter. He says nepotistic, the most nepotistic. We don't know how he came by that conclusion. But Mr. Krapa has a response. When we come back, stay with us. So welcome back to the point of view. We're trying to understand this corruption conversation with the NDC MPP trading accusations. President spoke on Monday at the bar conference. Asiodun Ketia, the General Secretary of NDC, spoke on Tuesday. We have Herbert Krapa, who's a government spokesperson on legal and governance affairs. Felix Ofosu-Kwakye, who's a former Deputy Minister for Communication and Information. Herbert, Mr. Kwakye has now introduced another dimension. He's now saying that the reason the president, in their view, is unable to deal decisively with these corruption cases is that his friends and family are too invested in his government. So he doesn't have the will, if I'm paraphrasing him right, to deal with it to the core. What's your defense?
Actually, I don't think that's what he said.
Okay.
He actually said that a statement that candidate Akufo-Addo made in opposition is different from what he thinks is happening currently. And therefore, he does not think that, or the NDC does not think that the president can be taken seriously when it comes to the fight against corruption. I think that's what he meant. And then he proceeded to give you a tall list of names of people once he sees Oforiata, concludes that it's a cousin of the president, proceeds to add Kwesi Amoakwata, the Etiwa MP, who bears no relation with the president, proceeds to add. But I don't think that really is the thrust of the matter, because I could also go on listing names, Ibrahim Mahama, and the many names of people who are related to the president or who are related to persons president has put in office and what have you, are friends and family of the then president John Mahama. But I don't think that is the focus of our conversation. The focus of our conversation today is whether the current President Akufo-Addo, has demonstrated by his actions that he's committed to the fight against corruption. And I think it is important for us to break that down into very important progressive dimensions of whether the institutions are working, dimensions of whether you are putting laws in place to make sure that the corruption does not go on, dimensions of whether you are protecting or not protecting persons purported to be involved in corruption offenses. I think those are the important matters that we should be focused on. And let's not digress into talks that are not important to the conversation that you have put before us. Go to the Public Procurement Authority. In spite of the troubles that have bedeviled the authority recently with regard to the chief executive officer, the now suspended chief executive officer. 2.5 billion Ghana cedi savings have been made between January 2017 and July 2019. How is that?
Where's the breakdown?
In the area
and
the president himself gave the breakdown in his speech.
Did he?
He did, in his speech.
He mentioned specific cases where contracts which are supposed to be sole sourced were competitively tendered for?
So he lumped it together in percentage terms. That in 2016, 47% of the contracts that had been put before the PPA in terms of restricted tender were passed. And then 99% in terms of sole sourcing. In terms of, no, that's 2019. Sorry, I'm talking about 2019. 2019. So 47% restricted tender since he became president, 47% restricted tender, as against 99% restricted tender under the NDC. So 47%, you are talking up to 2019. By 2016, you are talking 99% restricted tender. In sole sourcing, 56% is what was approved, sole sourcing, as against 96% when the NDC was in power.
But we want the breakdown properly, not the percentage. We want the cases.
The full breakdown.
Are you prepared to submit that to us later?
We are prepared to make to make available to the Ghanaian
be
people
very useful.
the full breakdown of the cases. This is an area that you have saved 2.5 billion Ghana cedis based on what you have done, cutting down on sole sourcing and cutting down on restricted term, because you know that it is an avenue that is used to inflate.
We have a minute. Final. This is if you want to say you give me the list, I'm happy to use that later. Your OSP is struggling. He wrote a missive a few weeks ago saying state agencies are frustrating his work. It's very clear that even though the president has set it up, the person who's been put there and the resources has been given, and what is happening clearly shows that he is not optimally doing his job.
I think it is important first that the bold step has been taken by the president to set up the office of the special prosecutor. Equally important is the person that he has put there, a person who you can't say is a member of his party, a person who you know has been relentless and objective in the fight against corruption. But you know that the office of the special prosecutor, it's in its early days. What is important is for all of us to make sure that the office of the special prosecutor is resourced, that the institutional conflicts that you are seeing in the early days of the office are all resolved, they are ironed out. The office of the special prosecutor, the duties of the prosecutor are harmonized, and the prosecutor is empowered to go out.
Let me read some comments since I haven't read any. Let me just read a few. Good evening, Bernard. Why is it difficult for the president to disclose the reports of numerous committees? If he wants us to trust him, the report should be made public, available. At least it's our money that was used to set up these committees. The president dislikes clearing agent tag on him, so we officially name him the chief freight forwarder since he claims he forwards cases to the appropriate institutions. Baba from Ashaliboche. Good evening, Bernard. Mr. PLO Lumumba of Kenya said the quickest way to be rich in Africa is to be a politician. Recently, the MP who won the election at the recent by-election to fill the seat of her late husband donated 11 vehicles to a constituency. Where did she get that kind of money from? Abbas from Takrady. Bernard, it saddens me to hear our president tag everyone as his opponent on the issue of corruption. Remember, the president said we should be citizens and not spectators. Hi, Bernard. I'm Eugene from Kumasi. Ex-President Mahama couldn't exonerate himself when he was asked if he was corrupt. NDC as a political party should desist from cheap politics. Ghana is far gone beyond cheap propaganda. Good evening, Bernard. Some of us are disappointed in this government, and trust me, things are not okay. So they should sit up. Stephen from Ablikuma. Question. So who are those involved in Australia visa scandal? Are we saying nobody's behind it? God save us. The government has been swallowed by corruption. God bless Ghana. Hope L. Good evening. Please, does dismissal or suspension solve the issue of corruption? Kindly explain. Probably need another show to discuss that. I think I'll leave it here. I don't have any more time.
Well, Bernard, two quick things.
You have 30 seconds. So
if you are holding out hope that they will publish a list of contracts totaling 2.75 billion, that
he's promised you bring it.
I can assure you that you will get no such list. That list has been waiting for 2 years. We have demanded it for 2 years. It doesn't come. Wow. Manasseh blew it apart a few weeks ago in his documentary because the PPA told him that there are confidential facts that they cannot disclose from that list.
So I shouldn't hope for the list. Okay.
I actually left out one name, Nana Akufo-Addo. She's also in government, the president's daughter.
Bernard,
we finished.
She's on the creative arts council.
The prosecutions are ongoing.
So when are we having prosecutions of NPP?
We'll do part 2.
We saw what happened under John Mahama.
No, the show is over. We have to close. Because we have to show something else.
Yeah, but last when are we having prosecutions of NPP?
Well, we saw what happened under John Mahama. We saw how he could not boldly face the matter of corruption. We saw how he did not have the courage to face the matter of corruption.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for staying with us. My name is Bernard Avle. My guests were Felix Ofosu-Kwakye and Herbert Krapa. Stay with CTTV. Good night.
Point of View is brought to you in association with Stanbic Bank. Moving forward.